Hey everyone, and welcome back to Strange Serenity, the podcast that, well, I like to think we dig up the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Sure.
So today we're going to be looking at a character from Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Um,
Koba!
Koba. He's a fascinating character, isn't he? One of those that you can't stop thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. He's like brutal,
Oh, he's brutal.
complex, and honestly a little unsettling, which is why we love him so much.
Yes.
So today, to add another layer to this deep dive, we're going to be taking a look at Koba through kind of a theological lens.
Ooh, I love this.
Yeah. So does his story have any echoes of biblical narratives? Is he a fallen angel, a cautionary tale, something even more complex?
Let's find out.
Let's find out. Okay, so to really kind of start wrapping our heads around Koba, we have to start with his backstory.
Right.
He's not just some, villain that tops up out of nowhere.
No, he's very much a product of his experiences.
Right. And those horrific experiments that he went through as a lab subject, they left him with deep scars, both physically and psychologically.
It's almost like the story of Job from the Bible,
Right.
but with a much, much darker twist.
Absolutely.
Right. Job finds solace in his faith, but Koba just finds fuel for his rage.
Yeah.
Why, as the listener, why do you think that is? Why that difference?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question. I think a key difference between Job and Koba is that Job believed that his suffering ultimately came from a benevolent force, God.
Yeah.
He questioned why he had to endure the pain that he was going through, but his faith in God never actually wavered.
Yeah. Okay.
Koba, though, he sees his suffering as a direct result of human cruelty.
Right.
And that cruelty, that really shapes his entire worldview. It shapes how he views the world.
It really makes you think. If
Yeah.
Koba had experienced even a sliver of compassion from humans, would he have ended up on a different path? Would he have been able to see humans as anything other than monsters?
I mean, it's a question.
Right.
I think it raises those age-old questions about the cyclical nature of violence. If we treat others with cruelty, are we just planting the seeds for our own destruction?
Now, I know some people out there see some interesting parallels between Koba and Lucifer, the fallen angel who rebelled against God. What kind of similarities do you see?
Well, I think both Koba and Lucifer felt deeply betrayed by those in power.
Okay.
Lucifer, felt betrayed by God, and Koba, of course, by humanity.
Right, right.
And both of them led these rebellions that were driven by the belief that violence was the only path to justice.
And I have to say, I don't know about you, but Koba's iconic line, human work,
Oh, yes.
gives me chills every time I hear
Me
it.
too.
It's just so much venom in those two words.
Yeah.
All of his pain, all of his rage is just distilled into that one phrase.
It really, really is. I mean, and it's a line that really perfectly captures his distrust, his deep-seated distrust of human. I mean, he truly believes that they're inherently evil, incapable of change.
Right.
And unfortunately, tragically, his experiences kind of have given him all the evidence that he needs to support that belief.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly complex character, shaped by trauma, driven by this thirst for revenge. But there's another key player in this whole story.
Yes.
Caesar.
Caesar.
And a lot of people see him as a kind of a Christ-like figure.
Yeah. Caesar represents a very different approach.
Okay.
He preaches unity, forgiveness, and this peaceful coexistence. He believes in the possibility of change for apes and for humans.
So do you see any specific parallels between Caesar's actions and the teachings of Jesus? For example, I know Jesus was always advocating for loving your enemies. Does Caesar do anything similar?
Absolutely. I mean, think about Caesar's interaction with the humans who helped him early on.
Right.
He shows them kindness. He protects them, even though he has, every reason to distrust them.
Yeah.
And that's a radical act of forgiveness,
Right.
especially given what he himself has suffered at the hands of humans.
So if Caesar represents this Christ-like ideal of forgiveness,
Yeah.
where does that leave Koba?
Well, I mean, I think it sets up this really fascinating dichotomy.
Okay.
Koba becomes the antithesis of Caesar.
Yeah.
He represents that Old Testament idea of an eye for an eye,
Yeah.
demanding that retribution for the wrongs inflicted upon the apes.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like he's a biblical zealot.
Yeah.
Convinced that violent revolution is the only way to achieve justice. and he sees Caesar's attempts at peace as weakness. Like a betrayal of their kind.
Exactly. And this isn't just a political disagreement.
Right.
It's a fundamental clash of ideologies. Caesar represents hope and Koba represents despair.
And I know one thing the source material touches on is that, it compares Koba's philosophy with the theological concept of total depravity,
Mm.
which sounds pretty intense. Could you, break that down for our listener?
Sure, yeah. So the concept of total depravity, it suggests that humanity is so inherently flawed, so steeped in sin that we're beyond redemption. We're just beyond saving.
Right.
And this really aligns perfectly with Koba's worldview.
So he doesn't just want revenge. He wants annihilation.
Yes.
He truly believes that humans are incapable of change and must be wiped out.
Precisely.
And this is where Koba's story takes this really, really tragic turn. Because he sets out to become the very monster he sees in all of humanity.
Right.
It's a chilling example of how righteous anger can turn into something really, really dark and destructive.
It really is, and it makes you think about the nature of revenge. What does theology have to say about this urge, this primal urge?
Well, I'm not a theologian, but I would say that most religions would warn against the dangers of revenge, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't it always end up consuming the person who's seeking it?
A lot of religious traditions out there really emphasize forgiveness and reconciliation. They suggest that holding on to anger and hatred is only going to hurt you.
Yeah.
In the long run.
But don't some religions also have that eye for an eye concept?
Yeah.
So does that mean they endorse revenge?
Well, actually, the eye for an eye principle in the Old Testament, it was meant to limit retribution, not actually encourage it. It was about, making sure the punishment fit the crime,
Okay.
preventing excessive revenge.
So it's more about boundaries and fairness than, perpetuating this cycle of violence.
Exactly. The idea was to create a system of justice, not an endless feud. And even then, the Old Testament, it includes those calls for forgiveness and mercy.
Okay. Which Koba seems to just totally disregard, right?
Yeah.
He takes the idea of justice and just warps it into something cruel and vengeful.
He does, doesn't he? And that's where that comparison to Lucifer, I think, becomes even more striking.
Right.
They're both consumed by this desire for power, and they believe that violence is the only answer, and they become blinded by their rage. They just, they lose sight of any possibility of peace or redemption.
It's almost like they fall into this trap.
Yeah.
Of believing that their enemies are so evil that any action against them is justified.
And that's dangerous. That's a very dangerous way of thinking.
Yeah.
It can lead to dehumanization and ultimately atrocities.
It's just, I don't know. I just find it fascinating how Koba's story intersects with all these deep theological concepts.
Yeah.
And we've talked about total depravity and the dangers of revenge. But what about redemption?
Ooh.
Is there any possibility of that for someone like Koba?
That's a really tough question.
Yeah.
And I think it really goes to the heart of what makes Koba such a compelling and tragic character. He is capable of great love and loyalty, as we see in his relationship with Caesar.
Yeah.
But, he's also capable of incredible cruelty and violence.
So, do you think that his past trauma, completely excuses all the things that he does?
Mm-hmm.
Or is he still responsible for his actions?
It's really complex, On the one hand, you can understand how his experiences shaped him,
Right.
shaped his worldview, and fueled his rage.
Right.
But on the other hand, he does make choices, right?
Yeah.
Conscious choices.
Right.
That lead to suffering and destruction.
It's almost like he becomes trapped in a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
He believes that all humans are monsters, so he acts monstrously towards them, which just reinforces his belief that they're inherently evil.
You've got it.
Yeah.
He becomes a victim of his own hatred.
Right.
Perpetuating the cycle of violence that he's trying to break free from.
It's like there's a real Shakespearean tragedy to Koba's whole arc.
Yeah.
He starts out as this victim seeking justice for the wrongs that were done to him, but that thirst for revenge, just totally consumes him, turning it into the very thing that he hates.
And the question of his redemption remains.
Yeah.
Can someone so consumed by darkness find their way back to the light?
Yeah. It's a question that haunts me every time I watch the film.
Yeah, me too.
There are moments where you see glimpses of the ape that he could have been.
Yeah.
the ape that Caesar believed he could be.
Yeah.
But ultimately, he chooses hatred over hope.
He does, and those glimpses of what could have been. I mean, that just makes his downfall all the more tragic.
You know what strikes me, though, is that even though Koba's story is set in this, this fantastical world of intelligent apes,
Yeah.
the themes are so human, you know? Like, we all struggle with anger, with a desire for revenge, with the question of, how do we respond to suffering?
Yeah, I'm absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes, Koba's story so powerful and so relevant. I mean, it holds a mirror up to our own capacity for darkness, and
Yeah.
light.
It forces us to ask ourselves, how would we react in similar circumstances? Would we choose forgiveness over vengeance?
I mean, would we?
Could we break free from this cycle of violence?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear what resonates with you most about Koba's character. I mean, for me, it feels like Koba's story it's a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
It shows us what can happen when we let anger and that desire for revenge just consume us.
It's definitely one way to interpret it, but I do think there's also a glimmer of hope embedded in his tragic end.
Right.
Remember that scene where Caesar confronts him on the collapsing tower?
Oh, yeah. The visual of that, crumbling tower with those two, just going at it.
Yep.
Both physically and ideologically. I mean, it's seared into my brain.
It's so powerful.
Yeah, so powerful. What do you think about that scene? What does it, what kind of emotions come up for you when you watch that?
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because, even in that moment,
Right.
with everything falling apart around them, Caesar reaches out to Koba.
Yeah.
He offers him a chance to be saved. A chance to step back from the brink.
It really shows you how, forgiving Caesar is.
Yeah.
Even after all of that, all the betrayal, the bloodshed, Caesar still sees Koba as, worthy of redemption.
Yes.
He still believes that there's good in him somewhere.
Yeah.
Deep, deep, deep down.
It's amazing. I mean, Caesar, he embodies that idea of radical, love and forgiveness.
Yeah, it's powerful.
It's such a powerful contrast, to Koba's worldview, which is, built on the belief that humans and anyone who sides with them is beyond saving.
Right. So even though Koba ultimately rejects that,
Right.
he rejects Caesar's offer
Yes.
and it chooses his own destruction. Does the fact that Caesar offered, suggest that redemption is always possible?
I wouldn't say that it's always possible, but it's always there.
Right.
As a possibility. It's up to the individual to choose whether they want to accept it.
It's kind of like the idea of repentance.
Yeah.
In a lot of religious traditions.
Yeah.
No matter how far you've strayed, you can always turn back, seek forgiveness, and just start over.
It's a powerful concept,
Sure.
and I think it's really present, in Caesar's actions. He doesn't condone what Koba does, but he still offers him a way out.
Yeah.
He doesn't give up on him.
It really makes you wonder.
Yeah.
What if Koba had taken his hand?
Right.
What if he had chosen a different path? Could he have found that redemption? Could he have, broken free from all that hate that was just eating him up inside?
Yeah. It's a question that stays with you,
Yeah.
after the film ends. And I think that's what makes these kinds of stories so powerful.
Yeah.
They invite us to really consider the complexities of morality,
Yeah.
the consequences of our choices.
Right.
And the possibility of change, even in the darkest of hearts.
Now, we spent a lot of time on Koba's, I guess you could say his negative traits, the rage, the thirst for revenge.
Yeah.
What about the positive qualities? What stood out to you?
Well, I mean, we can't forget that he was fiercely loyal
Right.
to his fellow apes. He was courageous in battle, and he really believed that he was fighting for the greater good.
Yeah.
I mean, his methods were obviously misguided, but that desire to protect his kind, that was admirable.
Yeah, it's easy to label him as a villain,
Yeah.
and kind of dismiss him. But,
Right.
But like all of us, he was a complex person. Or ape.
An ape. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
With good qualities and bad qualities.
And I think that's what makes him so interesting. He challenges us to look beyond those labels and really grapple with the nuances of morality.
Mm-hmm. Koba's story just leaves us with so many questions.
It does.
When is rebellion justified? When does righteous anger cross the line into something destructive?
Right.
Can true justice exist alongside forgiveness?
These are questions that people have been wrestling with for centuries.
Right.
Philosophers, theologians,
Yeah.
I don't think there are any easy answers.
Yeah. But maybe that's the point of it all,
I
right?
think so.
Maybe Koba's story isn't really about giving us answers, but it's about, like, making us ask these tough questions,
Mm-hmm.
examine our own beliefs, and consider all these different perspectives.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, I think you're right on the money. It's about encouraging us to engage more deeply.
Yeah.
Not just with the story, but with the larger questions that it, brings up.
So there you have it, folks. We've dived deep, deep, deep into the character of Koba.
Mm-hmm.
We've explored his motivations, his flaws, those glimmers of hope. We've analyzed him through, that theological lens,
Oh, yeah.
drawn comparisons to biblical figures, wrestled with those really, really big ideas.
It's been a journey.
It has. It's been a journey. What a ride.
Oh, yeah.
And we really, really want to hear from you. What do you think about Koba? Is he a villain? Is he a victim? Is he like a cautionary tale?
Yeah, let us know.
Share your insights with us on social media.
Let's keep this conversation going,
Let's keep this conversation going. And until next time, just keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep finding the extraordinary in the ordinary.